as well as other drama from the 16th and 17th centuries. By the way, here is my contact info. Here is my contact info. It didn't make it onto the handout, and I'm so glad to see so many of you here, and I'm sorry you have to share the handout. We don't have enough for everybody. Can everybody see a handout? Hopefully? Okay. So here's my contact info, which is not on the handout. My former student Parker and I, Parker's over there in the purple shirt, we just attended a conference in Gdansk, Poland, where he presented on the song Sigh No More from Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, a paper originally written for a course he took with me. And my work at the conference was in a seminar group dedicated to the idea of strangers on the stage during Shakespeare's time. Now, stranger has a lot of meanings in English. It can mean more strange. You are strange, but he is stranger. It can also mean someone you've never met, and especially in Shakespeare's day, not so much now, it can mean foreigner, sort of the same as Russian, right? Stranets. So, we all, in my seminar in Gdansk, we all had papers dealing with characters from various plays visiting or living in countries where they were not born. They were considered outsiders. They were considered foreigners. They were considered strangers. I have lived as a stranger, certainly in Ukraine for 4 years, especially when I first came here. It was, I stood out, and it was made quite clear to me several times that I didn't really belong in Ukraine. It happens sometimes. And many of you perhaps have traveled as strangers or lived as strangers in another culture at some time. So in my seminar in Gdansk, I talked about Dutch characters on the Shakespearean stage. As it turns out, most of my scholarly publications have involved the portrayal of Dutch characters on the English stage. And thus, as Nadia mentioned, I was ready when I came across a previously unknown play called The Dutch Lady this year in February. It was a huge amount of work to transcribe this play from the old-fashioned handwriting. Parker and 2 other people helped me in Abilene, and to study the play, to get it ready to be performed this July in London, Birmingham, and Stratford-upon-Avon. But we had a great time introducing the play to the public. I also wrote a piece for the Times Literary Supplement, and I will be... Next slide. I also wrote a play for the Times Literary Supplement, and I will be turning this play into a book, which I hope will be published in early 2019. So that's what I've been working on lately. Back to the idea of Shakespeare and the stranger. We're going to look at a few passages from Othello, and then take a break for 5 minutes, and then take a look at a few passages from The Merchant of Venice, and one other play, actually. And I hope there will be time for questions at the end. I'll try to leave time for questions at the end. So, Othello, as you all know, is about an outsider, a black African man who lives in Venice. Othello describes his early life in Africa in a speech that we will look at in a minute. He was a warrior from his youth. At some point, he was sold into slavery. At some point, he was rescued from slavery. And somehow, he became a member of the Venetian Navy. You may think, wait, how did a black African become an officer in the Venetian Navy? Well, it actually was possible. Military service was one of the best opportunities for an outsider, for a younger brother, for an illegitimate son, or for strangers, outsiders, to succeed. Othello rises through the ranks to become general of the Venetian Navy, one of the most powerful navies in the world, right, at that time. Venice was its own republic. It wasn't part of Italy at that time. So he's risen through the ranks, and it seems like he has become completely accepted by Venetian society, but he is still an outsider. The Venetian Senate is quite happy to have Othello involved with their ships, but they feel differently about Othello being involved with a Venetian woman, with the senator's daughter, named Desdemona, right? You remember that? Can you imagine a society in which a black man could rise to a very high position of power and yet many members of that society might still show racism. I can imagine such a society. I know such a society. The play Othello begins with three racist characters on stage. Iago, the villain of the play, Roderigo, who wanted to marry Desdemona, and Brabantio, that's Desdemona's father. So now go to your handout, and so will I. Once again, I apologize that we don't have enough handouts for everybody. Just try to look on with someone. So Roderigo and Iago have heard a rumor that Desdemona and Othello have run off to get married. And Roderigo says, "What a full fortune does the thick lips owe if he can carry it thus." So instead of calling Othello by his name or saying the general, he calls him Thick Lips, making fun of his appearance, which is a little different from the appearance of your normal Venetian, pointing out that Othello is an outsider. And when Brabantio wakes up, they tell him that his daughter has run off with Othello. But Iago has a special way of expressing that. Next slide. He says, "Now, even now, very now, an old black ram is tupping your white ewe." And rather than explain to you what tupping means in Shakespeare's day, here's a poster from a production of Othello in 2010. Yeah, that's what it means. It's a farm. It's an agricultural term. So those of you in agriculture understand this sort of thing. So, using offensive language to point out Othello's difference. And Brabantio, Desdemona's father, he can't believe it. And when he finally sees Othello, he says, "O thou foul thief," next quote on your handout, "where hast thou stowed my daughter? Damned as thou art, thou hast enchanted her." He says, "Thou hast practiced on her with foul charms, abused her delicate youth with drugs or mineral." This is a stereotype about Africans, that they are involved with these black magic. He's some sort of witch doctor. He's some sort of, he knows about some strange magic charms. So using stereotypical beliefs about Africans to argue against Othello. And Brabantio actually repeats this claim no less than 4 times. He used magic, he used charms, he used some sort of magic potion. And the Duke of the Senate finally says, to vouch this is no proof. Listen, Brabantio, you keep saying that, but you have offered no proof for it. The Duke is a very fair-minded person who treats Othello very fairly, actually. He's not actively racist, at least. He has one line later that says, "Well, Brabantio, your son-in-law may be, he seems to be more fair than black." So that's saying he's not so bad for a black person. So he's not actively racist. But now we're going to get to the next quote in your handout here in a second. I need to just close that document, which is getting in my way. Come on. So they have a meeting before the Senate to find out what happened. Did Othello unfairly steal Desdemona from her house, or did Desdemona marry him of her own free will? And Othello has a very good defense for himself. He explains the process through which they fell in love. And let's look at that in a video clip in a 1995 movie directed by Kenneth Branagh, starring Lawrence Fishburne as Othello. So this is the very long quote on your handout where Othello tells the story of his early life and of his courtship of Desdemona.
Her father loved me, oft invited me, still questioned me the story of my life from year to year. The battles, sieges, fortunes that I have passed. Even from my boyish days, to the very moment that he bade me tell it, wherein I spoke of most disastrous chances, moving accidents by flood and field, hairbreadth escapes in the imminent deadly breach, being taken by the insolent foe and sold to slavery. And of the cannibals that each other eat, the anthropophagi, and men whose heads do grow beneath their shoulders. These things to hear would Desdemona seriously incline, and with a greedy ear devour up my discourse, which I observing, took once a pliant hour, and found good means to draw from her a prayer of earnest heart, which I would all my pilgrimage dilate. She gave me for my pains, a world of sighs. She swore, and faith, 'twas strange. 'Twas passing strange, 'twas pitiful, 'twas wondrous pitiful. She loved me for the dangers I had passed, and I loved her that she did pity them. This only is the witchcraft I have used.
I'll tell you what witchcraft I have used. If we can keep going, that'd be fine, if it will work. Is that the end of that clip?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Okay, I'll fill in what he says next. He says, this only was the witchcraft I have used. Yeah, that's fine, thanks. So, that, it wasn't really witchcraft. It was just, being charming and telling a good story. And then his next line is, oh, here comes the lady. Ask her yourself. Ask her how it happened. So, he's not afraid. He's very confident. He's very fair-minded, and he tells truly and beautifully that Desdemona loved him for who he was, for his experiences, for his qualities, for his identity, really. He obviously did not steal her away from her father. If all Othello had to deal with in this play was the racism of Desdemona's father, he would have succeeded. Because Brabantio agrees. He finally says, okay, fine. I see that she wanted to be with you, so take her. That's fine. But he also has to deal with Iago. Iago is racist. Iago is jealous. Iago is insecure. And Iago is just plain evil. And being insecure and jealous himself, Iago knows exactly how to plant insecurity and jealousy into someone else's mind. So, when he wants to take down Othello, he knows where Othello is vulnerable. He knows that Othello still feels like an outsider in Venice, like a stranger. He knows that the racist society of Venice has indeed left a mark on Othello. Othello seems confident and self-assured, but Othello realizes that others do not always recognize his accomplishments simply because of his skin color, simply because he is an outsider, a stranger. Iago hits Othello in a place he knows many men are vulnerable, his relationship with his wife. Iago uses racist ideas to plant the idea that Desdemona may not be faithful to him. So, look at your handout there. Iago is saying, I wonder if Desdemona's faithful to you. Maybe she's cheating on you with Cassio, another character. Because he says, the next quote on your handout, as to be bold with you, remember that Desdemona did not effect many proposed matches of her own clime, her own complexion, her own degree, whereto we see in all things nature tends. Isn't it just natural that white people marry white people? Doesn't nature teach us that you choose someone of your own background, of your own degree? Using a racist assumption to get under Othello's skin, and it works. Even though, because Iago's so good at what he does, Othello begins to show the effects of living in the racist society of Venice for so long. And when he's alone on stage, he says, haply for I am black, and have not those soft parts of conversation that chamberers have, or maybe because I am declined into the vale of years, yet that's not much, she's gone. And so that's basically the exact middle of the play, and Othello has lost confidence in his wife. That speech, "Haply for I am black." Haply means perhaps. And he says, maybe because I'm black, maybe because I'm not educated in the courtly style, maybe because I'm older. And that's also a common stereotype. An older man marries a young wife and he has to worry if she's faithful or not. And he believes, despite his position, despite everything, he believes Iago's racist accusations. So our next picture up here shows this scene, Act 3, Scene 3. This is one of the great scenes. I believe I closed this document a minute ago. Come on. This shows one of the great scenes that Shakespeare ever wrote. Act 3, Scene 3 is, where Othello is battling with these conflicting ideas that Desdemona is wonderful and yet Iago is truthful, supposedly, and he can't make sense of both Desdemona and Iago. And so in this picture, it's not the best depiction I could find, but it's pretty good. You notice that Othello is in the middle between two people, Desdemona and Iago. Notice that Desdemona is close, well, she's touching his face, they're in a loving position, and she's close to Othello's right ear, right? And she's probably talking to him, and he's listening to her with his right ear. Meanwhile, in the background, Iago tends to say things under his breath, which Othello might be able to hear in his left ear. Does this sound familiar to you folks? Do you have this same idea? In older English plays, during the Middle Ages, there were a lot of plays like Everyman and Mankind, plays in which a character would represent everybody, would represent the average person, or really would represent every man, or all of mankind, right? And this person had to make his way through this world, which is full of trials and temptations, and he would usually fail a little bit at first and succeed at the end. And such characters were always confronted by, this is also in Christopher Marlowe's play, Dr. Faustus, such characters were always spoken to by a good angel and an evil angel. Have you seen those? Even in old cartoons, actually, American cartoons. And so the good angel always speaks to you in your right ear, and the evil angel speaks to you in your left ear. And I believe the proper way to stage this scene is for Othello to stand there in the middle, and every time Desdemona comes on stage, she enters and exits several times. Iago enters and exits several times. Always to have Desdemona approach from the right and speak in his right ear. Always to have Iago approach from the left and speak in Othello's left ear. And this way, I believe that Shakespeare is indeed doing that. The next quote on your handout shows that Iago is associated with the devil. There's actually several times in the play he's associated with the devil, but at the end of the play, Othello realizes how evil Iago has been and says, "Wow, you must be the devil. I look down at your feet." Well, that's a fable, because supposedly the devil could take any shape. The devil could disguise himself, but he couldn't change his cloven feet. The devil had cloven feet like a goat or what animal has cloven feet? Like a pig, divided hooves. And so Othello was like, "Oh, let me check your feet to see if you're really the..." Oh, well, that's a fable anyway. So Iago is explicitly compared to the devil. And so that means, that it reinforces the idea that I put forth here, that Othello is like every man. Othello is like mankind. So the whole point of such plays is that this character, this hero, is able to choose what is good and able to choose what is evil. Okay, fine. But what does that have to do with Shakespeare and the Stranger? What does that have to do with Shakespeare's ideas about outsiders in society? Well, Shakespeare is putting forth a very interesting notion for 1605 that a black person can be every man, right? A black person can stand for any of us, or indeed all of us. We all need to listen to the better angels of our nature and to do what's right, and we all should stop listening to the worser angels of our nature, like Iago, which tempt us to do wrong. And so, even though, spoiler alert, Othello eventually fails. Othello, sadly, is not able to resist this poison that Iago pours in his ear. But the fact that he must be able to. The play is not even interesting unless you realize that this black man is able to make the right decision or the wrong decision. He's just like all of us, just like Hamlet, just like Macbeth, just like any tragic hero in Shakespeare. He is just as noble as a Romeo or a Hamlet or Antony. So that's what Shakespeare has to say about black people in 1605, which is, once again, pretty radical. But Othello, this play, by the way, does not only deal with black people as outsiders, strangers, people on the margins of society, people who do not have full rights. There is another group of people represented in Othello who do not have full rights. A group of people whose testimony was worth less in a court of law, a group of people who could legally be beaten, a group of people who had to work harder and do more just to be treated as almost equal. What group am I talking about? Women. Yes, it was legal to beat one's wife in those days. And in a terrible scene right after this, Othello strikes Desdemona in public. He hits her hard in the face in public, and everybody is shocked, but nobody arrests him. It's perfectly legal for him to beat his wife. And so this next group of, there is a discussion of women at the end of the play, which is very interesting, and that's our next little video clip from the same movie. It's the next one, right? Oh no, is this it? Okay, good. And we have some Spanish subtitles. I hope that helps.
Oh, these men.
This is the quote on the next page of your handout.
Dost thou in conscience think, tell me, Emilia, that there be women do abuse their husbands in such gross kind?
There be some such, no question.
Wouldst thou do such a deed for all the world?
Why, not you?
No, by this heavenly light.
Nor I by this heavenly light. I might do it as well in the dark.
Wouldst thou do such a deed for all the world?
The world's a huge thing. It is a great price for a small vice.
In troth, I think thou wouldst not.
In truth, I think I should. And I'll do it again when I've done it. For the whole world? That's pity. Who would not make her husband a cuckold and make him a monarch? I should venture purgatory for it.
I don't think there is any such woman.
Yes. Who doesn't? Glad you think it is their husband's fault if wives do fall. Say that they slack their duties and pour our treasures into foreign laps, or else break out in peevish jealousies, throwing restraint upon us. Or say they strike us. Why, we have galls, and though we have some grace, yet have we some revenge. Let husbands know their wives have sense like them. They see and smell, and have their palates both for sweet and sour as husbands have. What is it that they do when they change us for others? Is it sport? I think it is. And doth affection breed it? I think it doth.
Okay, that's enough. Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't include the whole long speech there, but what happens here is that we relate to Emilia. Desdemona's maid, who happens to be Iago's wife, by the way, is named Emilia. She is a normal woman. In this play, there are 3 female characters. Desdemona is the utmost perfect, angel, really. And there's Emilia. And the third character is Bianca, who is a courtesan, a prostitute. So we sort of have, three different examples of women. Perfectly virtuous, lacking virtue. And Emilia is sort of like every man or every woman. Desdemona says, would you cheat on your husband for the whole world? Emilia says, for the whole world? Yeah, I guess I would. I'm not saying that that's a virtuous answer, but it's a realistic answer. Emilia has a character that we can relate to. And we need someone in this play that we can relate to right now, because we have stopped relating to Othello. I think after Othello hits his wife in the street, we're shocked. And we know that he's planning to kill her, and we know that he's allied with Iago, and we don't even like him anymore. So we need someone else to relate to. We can't really relate to Desdemona, who's this perfectly virtuous maiden. Well, this perfectly virtuous wife, I should say. And so Emilia really takes over the hero position of the play after we lose Othello, after we stop caring about him. And Emilia argues passionately that basically women are people too. He's in that last speech of hers, yes, a dozen. Do you think there's any such woman, says Desdemona? Yes, at least a dozen. More than one, says Emilia, and as many to the advantage as would. But I do think it is their husbands' fault if wives do fall. Say that they slack their duties. Say that they don't give us the money they're supposed to. Or say that they break out in peevish jealousies. Or say they strike us. She's really saying to Desdemona, listen, think about your life. Your husband is very jealous. Your husband hit you. And Emilia says, we have Gauls. Let husbands know their wives have sense like them. They see, they smell, they can taste sweet and sour, just like husbands. Yes, women are people too, says Emilia in 1605. So in 1605, if you went to the Globe Theatre and saw this play, you would learn that black people are people too, and women are people too. Okay, it's time to wrap up this part of the lecture. We're going to break so you can get a drink or go to the bathroom, and we'll I guess actually, are there any questions about this part of the lecture, about this part so far? Yes?
I've read that in plays and theaters, Othello was never played by a black person until recently.
You're absolutely right. Well, because there were no black professional actors in Shakespeare's day, and, well, blacks and whites did not play on the same stage together for a long time. Blacks and whites didn't play on the same sports teams, etc., for a long time. So, in Shakespeare's day, they would take, when you have a lamp with a glass globe, and you use it, there becomes black stuff on the inside of that lamp. We call it lamp black. And they would take that stuff out of the inside of a lamp and use that for the makeup. Sorry, I wish I could show it to you. There's a picture of a different play by Shakespeare called Titus Andronicus, where you can see the character of Aaron the Moor, and his face is completely black. Not realistic for an African person, but absolutely black with lamp black. And perhaps the first black person to play the role of Othello was Ira Aldridge, who actually died only, the anniversary of his death was 3 or 4 days ago. He died in August, maybe 100 years ago or so. But yeah, black people did begin to play the role in recent years. And now it would be rather shocking to think of a white person playing Othello in blackface, although it happens in the opera by Verdi all the time. It's very rare for a black actor to play the singing role of Othello in the opera. So. Yes?
Question to the audience mostly. In Ukraine, do they study Shakespeare, like in schools?
Of course.
Okay.
English and American literature, so we research and investigate such subject very, very carefully.
Yeah, I found that my students at ICU had studied Shakespeare, and they were quite happy to study Shakespeare in English. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
To the same effect, men played women until very
Yes.
recently.
Well, not that recently. In Shakespeare's day, boys would play the women's parts, but starting in 1660, after the interregnum, when the theaters were closed, women began to play women around that time. So, in the big scheme of things, recently, but not that 340 years ago.
Investigate such problems that in Shakespeare time was it typical pairs like white woman and husband?
Was this issue that appeared on stage, the idea of a white woman marrying a black man, was that,
Well, generally, everyday's life.
you want to say, did that happen in life or did that happen in drama?
It was only in drama, not in everyday life.
Well, it was in everyday life, but very rare. First of all, there were very few black people in London. I mean, very few. There were a few. And, there are records of that. And guess what? Every once in a while, sure, a black man and a white woman, or vice versa, would marry. It has happened since the first time that black people and white people were in the same place. They have married. They have had children. But it was very rare. And for Shakespeare to put this on stage, he's intentionally putting on stage something that will make people think. Something that people say, whoa, what if that happened? He did the same thing 10 years earlier in Romeo and Juliet. Here's a family, these two families are fighting, and they can't possibly marry one another. It's forbidden love, right? What do you say, forbidden love, something like that. And yet, Romeo and Juliet get together. And, that happens too. Can you imagine a society in which dad does not like your boyfriend sometimes, ladies? I mean, can you imagine? And it can be because of cultural things, it can be race, it can be other things as well.
Was this play done in the U.S. in the old times?
Yes, it was. It was done in the U.S. I don't have a complete history of that, but yes, in the United States in the 1800s, when race relations were not good, this play was done very often, and it helped bring up these issues and make people think, which is good. Shakespeare's plays make people think. They are very entertaining, but that's not all they are. They are entertaining, but they also are raising issues that are important for us to consider. All right? All right, let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll have some more thoughts about The Merchant of Venice and another play. Thank you for returning for the second half. So glad to see so many people here. I'm glad to see there's a lot of interest in Shakespeare in Kyiv, and thanks for your attention and your great questions. Yura, Mr. Zayarni, you asked a question about white actors playing black parts on Shakespeare's stage, and this is the image I referred to. This is a sketch that someone drew after seeing a play called Titus Andronicus, a play that you could have seen actually in the Globe on Screen yesterday, well, in England. But do you ever go to see plays from the Globe in the cinema here? Okay, soon you'll get to see a play called Titus Andronicus. It's really violent. Don't bring any children to it, I'm serious. It's for maybe 15 and up. But it's a play that some people don't like, but I like it more the more I think about it. And so this shows the title character Titus Andronicus, who's the ruler of Rome, and his two sons there who are returned from war with the Goths. You know, of course, that these Germanic tribes like the Goths ended up destroying the Roman Empire in the 5th century. So this play is depicting, events from around that time. And so this is Tamara, the queen of the Goths, and she kneels before Titus to beg that he will not harm her sons. Now, the picture is not accurate. There should be a third son there, actually, named Alarbus, and she's saying, please don't kill my son, because Titus has already said, okay, because so many of our people have died, we're going to take your firstborn son and kill him. Human sacrifice, an eye for an eye. And Tamara begs, please don't, please don't. And there's her two sons also, kind of arrest. They're in ropes, or, their hands are tied. And then the character on the far right, on your right, is Aaron the Moor. His name's Aaron. And he is black. I mean, that's just not realistic at all, Black people are not that black. But lamp black is really that black, Lamp black. Does everybody understand lamp black? Can somebody translate that, or? Okay. Soot, basically, yeah. It's black, yeah. And so, and you can see that he has sort of African features added to his face there. And actually, this is bonus material, not included in my notes, but, no charge for this next bit. Aaron is awful. Aaron is evil. He's as evil as Iago is. He's really terrible. His last speech in the play, he says, yeah, I used to do this bad thing and that bad thing. I would dig up a dead friend and set him on his best friend's doorstep, so that would, freak everybody out and make them sad again. And I would do this and that and blah, blah, blah. And my one regret in life is that I didn't do more evil. Okay, so Shakespeare, in his early career, Titus Andronicus is a very early play, maybe 1591. So Shakespeare, in his early career, seemed to he went with the popular notion that white is good and black is bad. We still have that language, right? If you're, oh, that's a black mark, or, you have white lines and black lines in your life, which are good, the white ones, So Shakespeare seemed to sort of buy into that idea, white is good, black is bad, in this early play. But then in later plays, not just in Othello, by the way, Shakespeare seems specifically to be sort of making up for this unfairly racist portrayal in this early play. He changes his writing later on. And regarding your question about marriage between opposing groups, it's interesting because actually the next leader of Rome, Basanius, he actually marries Tamara, queen of the Goths, who is, the enemy. In so many of Shakespeare's plays, in most of the Shakespeare plays, the marriages take place between people who shouldn't be getting married. Either the father hates the groom, or it's a different race, or it's a different nationality, or there's some reason why these marriages can't work. And Shakespeare's very interested in the question of marriage. So, all right, going on to The Merchant of Venice. How many of you have read or seen The Merchant of Venice? Okay, all right, not as many. It's not as popular in Ukraine, maybe, as some of the others. Well, then I'm going to give you a very brief story. There's a merchant from Venice, and his name is Antonio. He's not the main character, even though the play's named after him. The Merchant of Venice is named Antonio, and he loans his friend Bassanio some money. Bassanio needs money because he's going to go get married. He wants to marry Portia, just like the fancy car. A woman named Portia has got to be good. But it's spelled differently, Portia, Portia. So Bassanio wants to marry Portia, so he needs to borrow some money from Antonio so that he can buy nicer clothes and give gifts. And, it takes, you may not know this, but it takes money to woo a woman. So guys, just keep that in mind. So he borrows a substantial sum from, Bassanio borrows a substantial sum from Antonio, the Merchant of Venice. Well, Antonio doesn't have that much money in his pocket right now, so he has to go borrow it from Shylock. Have you heard that name, Shylock? That's the name of the villain of this play. Shylock is a Jewish moneylender, okay? And this play, you've heard, I've heard of that, yeah. And sometimes the word Shylock is used offensively as someone might call a Jewish person Shylock the same way a person might call a black person an offensive name, or a Ukrainian an offensive name, or a Moldovan an offensive name, or etc., or a Mexican an offensive name in Texas, where I'm from. So the play Merchant of Venice deals with anti-Semitism, okay? There's a Jewish character in there, and most of the characters hate Jews. Most of the characters are prejudiced against Jews and treat Jews very badly. The character of Shylock is an outsider. He is a Jewish moneylender. Once again, in Venice, Shakespeare seemed to use the city of Venice when he wanted to present a multicultural landscape, because it really was a multicultural city. Right there on the Adriatic Sea, as it was, right? On the Adriatic Sea, as it was, and they had such a great navy, and they traveled around so much, they brought other people to them. And anyway, it was a very open society. It was a republic. It was not a monarchy. And this Senate, this parliament sort of ruled the city, and they had rather open views, and they invited outsiders to live there. There was a large Jewish population in medieval Venice. To read what I wrote here, so I don't forget anything, Venice was a multicultural city where Shakespeare could believably write about outsiders and insiders living in the same city. It was perhaps one of his favorite ways to signify London, which had a small number of blacks and a fairly large number of Jews living in London. Elizabeth I had a doctor. Anybody know this? His name was Rodrigo Lopez. He was a Portuguese Jew, and he was the doctor of Queen Elizabeth. He was later, in an act of supreme anti-Semitism, accused of trying to poison Elizabeth and executed in 1594, just 2 years before Merchant of Venice was written. And probably the incident with Rodrigo Lopez inspired Shakespeare to think about these issues and to write The Merchant of Venice. But the play, besides Jews, by the way, the play also deals with a lot of other outsiders or strangers, and this is important. Shakespeare, before we ever meet Shylock, Shakespeare is careful to introduce us to the idea of outsider, the idea of strangers, and to what makes us, how outsider can you be? I mean, I write about English and Dutch relations, right? The English liked the Dutch, but the Dutch were still not English, right? They were outsiders in a way, but they were Christian, they were Protestant, and so they had a lot in common. Now, if you were Catholic, that was something else. And then if you were Jewish, that was something else. If you were black, that was something else. And the very worst outsider you could be in Shakespeare's England, anybody want to guess? The most stranger that you could be was what they called a Turk, a Muslim. Yeah, a Muslim. They said Turk, but it doesn't mean someone from Turkey. It means, they called Muslims Turks. Whatever. So, like the character we're about to meet in Morocco. So there are degrees of difference here, and the play introduces this idea very early. Going back to the... by the way, speaking... we just finished talking about Othello, but in the very last page of Othello, when the title character he hates himself. He realizes he was wrong about Desdemona. He was wrong about Iago. He hates himself. And he says, you know what? I'm basically a Turk. And that's his last line. Because he just feels like he is completely lost it. And he was not a Turk, by the way. He was never a Muslim. He was from sub-Saharan Africa. He was not Muslim. And he had become a Christian. Because Iago has a line at one point and says, oh, he loves Desdemona so much she can make him do anything, even renounce his baptism. Right? So he had become a Christian. But he says, he hates himself so much at the end, he says, I'm a Turk. Okay. Now, back to Merchant of Venice. And the main character who has the most lines is named Portia. This beautiful woman. She's not from Venice. She's from Belmont, which is just a kind of a fictitious place. Evidently, 50 or 100 kilometers south of Venice, evidently. And she is rich, she is beautiful, and she is powerful. She rules Belmont. No one else is in charge of Belmont but Portia. It seems like every man in Europe has heard of her. She's famously beautiful. She has suitors from various countries that come to visit her. The play mentions she has one suitor from Naples. And remember, Italy was not Italy back then. It was cut up into different countries. So Naples was its own country. She has a suitor from Naples, a suitor from the Palatine, that's modern-day Czechia, and from France. Portia doesn't like any of them. She makes fun of them based on the characteristics that are supposedly typical of where they come from. In English, we call that a stereotype. You have the same idea? Oh, well, you know how people from Italy are. They are all, well, you know how Americans are. They're all stupid. Well, you know how, So these stereotypical ideas, Portia believes in them. And she dismisses the guy from Naples, the guy from Palatine, and the guy from France. And then let's pick up on our handout. By the way, there's this, Portia's father is dead, and he invented a sort of game that every man who wants to marry Portia has to pick from a box, and if he picks the right box, he gets to marry her. If he picks the wrong box, he has to go away and never get married to anybody. So some men play the game and lose, and some men don't even play the game because... But anyway, in addition to those three that we've talked about, here come some more suitors. And I don't have a movie clip for this, sadly. But actually, Olga, would you mind coming up here and reading for Nerissa, and I'll go ahead and read for Portia. Okay. What say you then?
Mm-hmm. What say you then to Falconbridge, the young baron of England?
You know I say nothing to him, for he understands not me nor I him. He hath neither Latin, French, nor Italian, and you know that I have but a poor pennyworth in English. He's a proper man's picture, but alas, who can converse with a dumb show? And anyway, how oddly does he dress? I think he bought his doublet in Italy, his round hose in France, his bonnet in Germany, and his behavior everywhere. Okay, that's it. So the first stereotype we have is this man from England, the Baron of Falconbridge. Just stay here, just 2 seconds. And the stereotype about English people is that they don't speak foreign languages. And so she uses this stereotype to talk bad about this British guy. By the way, this play's written in 1596. All right, go ahead, Olga.
What think you of the Scottish lord, his neighbor?
He hath a neighbourly charity in him, for he borrowed a box of the ear from the Englishman, and swore he would pay him again when he was able. I think the Frenchman became his surety and sealed for another. Go ahead.
How like you the young German, the Duke of Saxony nephew?
Very vilely in the morning when he is sober, and most vilely in the afternoon when he is drunk. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Olga. So, here we have more stereotypical ideas. Scottish people like to fight, and German people like to get drunk. These are the stereotypes that are used. And Portia, supports these stereotypes. Okay, fine. But what about the English audience in 1590? We're going backwards in time, sorry, but in 1596 we're not at the Globe. We're at another theater called the Curtain, which they actually have recently discovered the foundations of, and they're digging it up in archaeology. And so what about those visitors sitting or standing at the Curtain, and they're laughing, oh yeah, the guy from Naples, ha ha, oh yeah, the guy from France, ha 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 ha. Well, what about this English guy? Oh, he doesn't even speak any languages, I can't talk to him. What about the Scottish guy? Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. Now, that's not as dangerous as it sounds, because King James was still just in Scotland. There's no idea of him becoming King of England yet. But anyway. So what did the English people think about, yes, we're laughing at stereotypes of other nations, and then Shakespeare brings up a stereotype of English people, that they can't speak foreign languages. Were they offended? Did they laugh even harder? Did they laugh even harder because they were offended? Who knows? But Shakespeare is really making the English audience think about stereotypes, right? It's one thing to think about stereotypes of Naples, stereotypes of France, but what about stereotypes of ourselves, right? If you in your mind, don't raise your hand, but if you in your mind have a stereotype of Greek people, if you in your mind have a stereotype of Moldovan people, if you in your mind have a stereotype of Russian people, just think, is there a stereotype of Ukrainian people? There was a long time, back in the old days. You've seen the movies, the Soviet movies, where there's always one Ukrainian guy speaking with a broad Western Ukrainian accent and, not too smart, and not the most sophisticated, some sort of farmer, ignorant farmer, There are stereotypes out there. And so Shakespeare is absolutely forcing the audience to think about why stereotypes. Do stereotypes work or not? And one of the most common stereotypes on the stage, by the way, was that German people, and that would include Dutch, because the Dutch and Deutsch are related words, right? That they always are drunk. This is the most common stereotype on the stage. And to put English people in there as not very smart and knowing no languages, together with these other well-known stereotypes, he's forcing the audience to think. That's 6 different suitors and 6 different stereotypes that just come one after another after another. And then we meet an unexpected suitor. Okay, so she gets rid of all these. Thank goodness they decided not to play. But then another unexpected suitor comes, and where's he from? Morocco. Morocco. Now, if you've been to Morocco, you know that people in Morocco have sort of, olive skin, the color of khaki pants or something. But people, Shakespeare thought they were black. So this guy is black, is a black African. And so he comes on stage and says, you can see this at the bottom of that same page of the handout, "Mislike me not for my complexion." That's his first line in the play. It's not, hello, hi, nice to meet you. Yes, I'm here to be... mislike me not for my complexion. Don't judge me, don't hate me because of my skin color, which is black. He would have been just like Aaron over there with lamp black on his face. Mislike me not for my complexion. It's the shadowed livery of the burnished sun, to whom I am a neighbor and near bred. Bring me the fairest creature from northward born, from Norway, from Sweden, where Phoebus' fire scarce thaws the icicles, and let him and me stand here. Let us make incision for your love, to prove whose blood is reddest, his or mine. That's a pretty good argument, which is very interesting, because actually in Shakespeare's day, a lot of people thought that royal people and common people had different blood. They really thought that. And I'm sure they thought that black people and white people had different blood. I'm sure they thought black people's blood was black, probably. But this guy says, yeah, bring the whitest guy you can find. And let's just stand here and we'll both cut our arms to show our love to Portia, and we'll see whose blood is reddest. Because he knows what color his blood is. It's the same blood, he says. I tell thee, lady, this color of mine, this appearance of mine hath feared the valiant. Some people are afraid of my face when they look at me. But, my love, I swear the best regarded virgins in our clime have loved it too. All the ladies back in Morocco think I look all right. I would not change this hue except to steal your thoughts, my gentle queen. The only reason I would even want to change I think my skin color is just fine, thank you very much, and so do all the girls in Morocco. But I would change it just if it would please you, my gentle queen. And Portia says, well, in terms of choice, I'm not solely led by my eyes. I have to follow this game that my father made up. But if my father had not scanted me and hedged me by his wit to yield myself his wife, who wins me by the means I told you, blah, blah, blah. If I could choose, your self-renowned prince then stood as fair as any comer I have looked on yet. Wow. Okay, so Portia's not racist. Listen, Morocco, if I could choose myself, which I can't, you're just as good as any other wooer who's come to me. Meaning what? Does she like the other wooers? No. She makes fun of them, and she says they're terrible, they're drunks, they can't talk. You're just as good as the others who have come to me. So, she doesn't like him. And Morocco is the picture of politeness. Even for that, I thank you. He's very well-spoken. He's a very, evidently a very learned person. And then a little bit later, he tries the game. He chooses the wrong casket. Sorry, spoiler alert. And he loses. And he says, Portia, adieu. I have too grieved a heart to take a tedious leave. Thus losers part. Portia says, good riddance. Draw the curtains, go. Let all of his complexion choose me so. Oh, really? Portia is very proud. She thinks a lot of herself, and she doesn't want the Italian, and she doesn't want the Spaniard, and she doesn't want the Englishman, and she does not want the Moroccan. I hope if any more black people come, they choose wrong also. Portia's a little bit racist. Keep in mind, in this play, that Shakespeare has made sure we are all aware of stereotypes, and even appealing characters like Portia can hold explicitly bad or racist ideas. Now let's go on to the main plot and this very interesting character of Shylock. So we'll go to our handout, and Sergei, would you please just sit there and read nice and loud for Antonio? Okay, Antonio is the Christian merchant of Venice, and he's going to borrow a little money to help out his bro Bassanio. And so I'll read for Shylock here.
Well, Shylock, shall we be beholding to you?
Signor Antonio, many a time and oft on the Rialto Bridge you have berated me about my money and the fact that I charge interest. Still, I have borne it with a patient shrug, for sufferance is the badge of all the Jewish tribe. You called me misbeliever. You called me cutthroat dog and spat upon my Jewish gabardine. That's a type of fabric that Jewish people would wear, a certain cloth. You spat upon my Jewish clothing, and all for use of that which is my own. Do you guys know that it was illegal for Christians to lend another Christian money at interest? And okay, good. Oh, great. Educated audience, I love it. Yeah. And yet, anybody here in banking? Hey, lending money is kind of a good thing. Sometimes it's very useful, right? And so there was a demand for this, and who filled that demand? Jewish people, because Christians were not allowed to do it. So the Jewish people, you know, it's a market economy. They provided a service, and people wanted to do it. And yet, by charging money at interest, all the Christians said, "Oh, that's bad. Oh, that's evil. That's just not right." Okay. You spat upon my Jewish clothing, and all for use of that which is my own. Well then, it now appears you need my help. Go to then. You come to me, you say, "Shylock, we would have moneys." You say so. You, that did void your room upon my beard, and foot me as you spurn a stranger cur over your threshold. Moneys is your suit? Well, what should I say to you? Should I not say, "Does a dog have money? Is it possible that a dog can lend you 3,000 ducats? Or shall I bend low and like a slave with bated breath and whispered humbleness say, 'Fair sir, you spat on me Wednesday last. You kicked me another day. Another time you called me dog. And for these courtesies, I'll lend you thus much moneys.'"
I am as like to call thee so again, to spit on thee again, to spurn thee too.
All right, that's the end of that. Thanks. All right, so Shylock is not good. He really is bad. Later on, he pulls a prank that he's really bad. He tries to kill Antonio for the sake of 3,000 ducats. Even though people offer him, say, "Here, take 6,000." Nope, and he tries to kill Antonio. It's really a cool scene. I won't do too many spoilers of that because it comes in the middle of the play. But so Shylock is bad. But guess what? Antonio, not great. You know, Christian merchant of Venice. He's so kind. He's going to lend Antonio. Sure, you want to go visit your girlfriend? Fine, I'll lend you some money. And yet, did Antonio really spit on Shylock, or did Shylock make that up? Sergei, read the line again.
Probably he did.
Yeah, say it. I am
as like to call thee so again, to spit on thee again, to spurn thee too.
Spurn is to kick. Yeah, sure. I'll probably call you dog again. I'll probably spit on you again, and I'll probably kick you again. He doesn't deny it. He confirms it, actually. Sorry. Yeah. He confirms it. Well, that's not very Christian, is it? What about spitting on someone's beard? That's what they did to Jesus when he was being led to crucifixion, right? You know, it's a deadly insult. It's a terrible thing to do. To call someone a dog, that's pretty low in those days. Nowadays, people like dogs, but back then, it was different. And to kick somebody with your shoe. Of course, shoes are dirty. Shoes are, you know, that's not nice to kick somebody. Back then, it wasn't nice. Nowadays, of course, it's fine. Just kidding. Yeah. So, even appealing characters like Portia can be racist and believe in stereotypes. And Antonio is basically an appealing character too, but wow, that's hard to miss. You know, yes, I spit on you. Yes, I kicked you. Yes, I called you a dog. Now, will you loan me some money or not? I need your money. Come on, I need your services. So, the play is inviting us to investigate our ideas about the other. Investigate if there's a Jewish person, is it really fair to spit on them? Is it really fair to call them names? Is it really fair to be anti-Semitic? And the answer to that comes in one of Shakespeare's most famous speeches he ever wrote, Shylock's speech. And I'm sorry I don't have the reference here, but I believe it's in Act 3 of Merchant of Venice. So let's look at that video there. The video doesn't start at exactly the same place as your handout. We're on the last page of the handout now. Shylock's long speech. That's not part of the PowerPoint, right? Yeah. Here we go.
I'm sure if you forfeit, you will not take his flesh. What's that good for?
To bait fish withal. If it will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge. He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies, and what's his reason? I am a Jew! Hath that a Jew eyes? Hath that a Jew hands? Organs? Dimensions? Senses? Affections? Passions? Fed with the same food? Hurt with the same weapons? Subject to the same diseases? Healed by the same means? Warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge? If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferings be? By Christian example. Why revenge? The villainy you teach me, I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will bet the instruction.
Antonio is at his house. We should speak with him.
That's enough. I think that's over, actually. Okay. I wonder whose phone was dinging. It was mine. Sorry about that. So Shylock here says, you know, I'm going to do wrong to Antonio. I'm going to try to kill him because he has disgraced me. He has hindered me. He's ruined my business. And Shylock makes money by lending money, right? So what does Antonio do? He lends money with no interest as a competitor, just to cause Shylock problems, no other reason. Heated mine enemies, and what's his reason? Because I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons? ... If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? Surely that's a reference to the Dr. Rodrigo Lopez and the accusation that he tried to poison Queen Elizabeth. I don't believe he did. So, does that remind you of anything else we've seen today? Isn't that the same thing that Amelia said about women? She said, "Hey, we have the same feelings. We have the same appetites for sweet and sour. We have the same feelings. We have the same inclinations as men do." So, 1596, Shakespeare, issues the radical notion that Jews are people too. If a Christian has eyes, a Jew has eyes. Eyes, by the way, are the most vulnerable. Just even a little speck of dust can make your eye hurt, right? Do not Jews have, vulnerabilities, hurts? Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs? Put a Jew here and a Christian here, and, compare everything bit by bit, and it's basically all the same. The same that Morocco said earlier in this play, right? Bring me the whitest man you can find, and we'll both cut our arms, show our blood. It's both red. It's both exactly the same. So Shakespeare is really, this is a pretty radical idea in 1596, right? And then in 1605, he goes one step further and says, oh, and by the way, black people are people and women are people. He really wanted to get this idea across that we all have more in common than we have that's different. A Dutchman and an Englishman under the clothes, can't tell them apart. A Jew and a Christian, basically the same. A black person and a white person, okay, you can tell the difference, but inside, it's the same. The blood is the same color. Shakespeare had actually been thinking about this issue from very early in his career. Maybe some of you know a lot about Othello, and maybe a few of you have read The Merchant of Venice. But I'm going to now tell you about a play that I think you probably don't even know that Shakespeare wrote. It's called Sir Thomas More. And this is a play that Shakespeare did not write all of it by any means, but he rewrote a little bit of it. This was a play written by several people, and probably maybe first written in 1593 or so. And it was about the life of the famous Sir Thomas More. There's a play about him called A Man for All Seasons in English. He wrote a book called Utopia, a very interesting satire. He was a counselor of King Henry VIII. He was a courtier, he was a gentleman, he was a scholar. He was a really great guy named Sir Thomas More. He was a knight, Sir Thomas More. And this play was written in 1592, and the first part of the play involves anti-alien riots. In 1592, and 93 both. First of all, Elizabeth had welcomed a lot of foreigners into London. There were a lot of strangers in London in Elizabeth's time. She thought it was really better for the economy to welcome skilled workers from certain countries. She didn't let everybody in, by the way, even though she hired a Jew as her doctor, and there were some black people in London at the time. But who she really wanted to come were Protestants. And so people from the Low Countries, from the Netherlands, she wanted them to come. They had problems because Spain was trying to take over their country at that time and turn all of Europe back to Catholicism. And so these Protestants in the Low Countries, in the Netherlands, they had problems with the Spanish, and she welcomed them into London. And a lot of them were shoemakers, a lot of them were rope makers, a lot of them had good skills, and she welcomed them into London. Others, certain French, not all the French, because of course most French are Catholics, but about the Protestant group in France at this time, in the time of Henry VIII, so-called Huguenots. What do you say? Huguenots, something like that. And so she welcomed those people, and once again, she thought it was a great idea to have these immigrants, to have these skilled people to help do certain things that were needed in the society. And anyway, she just thought it was she was not afraid of foreigners and strangers. But a lot of people didn't feel the same way. A lot of people in Elizabeth's England said, "These foreigners are taking our jobs." Can you imagine a society where people would say stuff like that? "These foreigners are even taking our women. These foreigners, these strangers, they're ruining our lives." The laborers, the common people who worked in handicrafts. A lot of these immigrants really were, they were skilled labor. They worked with their hands. So there were riots against the strangers back in Elizabeth's day. So right after these riots, Anthony Mundy and a whole bunch of other guys got together, not Shakespeare, and wrote a play called Sir Thomas More. And the first thing they write about are these riots, which had taken place during Henry VIII's time, right? Certainly not the riots which had just taken place last year in England. No. Completely different, but they looked a lot the same. So this was a way for those playwrights to comment on issues of today while supposedly referring to something that happened 80 years previous during the reign of Henry VIII. Well, 70 years earlier, during the reign of Henry VIII. So they wrote this play, and they sent it to the Master of the Revels, who was the government official in charge of approving or disapproving every play that got written, because he was basically the official government censor. Can you imagine a society in which a work of art would have to pass through the censors before it was allowed to be seen by people? Yeah. Okay. Good. And so they wrote the play, they sent it to the Master of the Revels, and he said, nope, this is way too much like the riots that happened last year. Come on, you don't think I'm stupid, do you? His name was Edmund Tilney, and he said, no, you can't play Act 1 of this whole play. Just forget it. You can begin the play with a brief summary of the riots. And by the way, say that the riots were, say that the strangers were Lombards, people from Lombardy, Italy. What do you call it? Lombardy? Okay. Say that there was a riot against the Lombards only. Don't mention Dutch or French, because he had gone through and marked out all these. The word Dutch, he just marked it out every time he saw it. The word French, he just put an X in the margin. So he said, rewrite it and just start with a summary about the riots, and then have Sir Thomas More come in and give a speech. Because, well, by the way, the reason why this scene is in Sir Thomas More is because there were these riots, and maybe the first notable thing that Thomas More did is when he was Sheriff of London, he put down the riots. He managed to speak peace to a riot is hard to put down, right? But he was amazing. He used the correct mixture of sternness and gentleness to talk to the rioters and get them to calm down. So that's why it's in this play about Sir Thomas More's life. But it also comments on something that had happened right then. Well, seemingly, the writers did not do what Tilney said. They did not want to remove those scenes, which were the best scenes in the whole play, by the way. And so instead, they hired a guy named William Shakespeare, maybe around 1600, maybe, to rewrite something, because they thought, listen, it's 8 years later, probably Edmund Tilney has forgotten those riots, and probably if we get Shakespeare to write a scene that explains what's going on, probably Tilney will say this is okay. And so Shakespeare wrote this scene where Thomas More says some long speeches to cause the riots to quiet down. And this is Shakespeare's gift. Just like we identify with Amelia, who speaks for all women, we identify with Othello. Even if we're white, we identify with Othello, who speaks for all people. He's like an everyman. We even identify with Shylock, who's a Jew. This is Shakespeare's gift, to make us connect with the people on stage. This is why his plays are so popular, right? This is why people are still paying good money to go see Shakespeare 400 years after his death. How many playwrights are there? I mean, Chekhov's only been dead 100 years, right? We still, good plays, great. 400 years ago, there's not many plays left that we go see. But Shakespeare had a gift to make us feel what the other person is feeling on stage. And the word for that is empathy. We feel empathy with these characters. We feel the same thing. And this speech from Sir Thomas More is basically Sir Thomas More, this character, teaching people about empathy. Okay, you rioters, you're so mad at these strangers, you want to get rid of them. Let me teach you something about empathy. You should feel that you are a human being, and these Dutch and French are also human beings, and we should recognize that. And so in this play that you've never heard of, Sir Thomas More, Shakespeare wrote this scene in his own handwriting, by the way. And I have handled this paper in the British Library. It's in plastic, you know, you don't get to actually touch the paper, but I have seen Shakespeare's own handwriting here, and he wrote very fast. It's just like, you know, as if these ideas came very freely to him. It's very messy. He obviously was writing it very fast. And so one of our best actors who's alive today, by the way, we're still okay on time, right? Yeah. Ian McKellen. He's one of the best actors alive today. And in his early life, before he was famous, they said, hey, do you want to get a good role in a play? He's like, yeah, what is it, Hamlet? Nope. What is it, Macbeth? Nope. What is it, King Lear? They said, you're way too young for Lear. Wait 30 years. What is it? Well, it's the main role in a play by Shakespeare and some other people. It's called Sir Thomas More. And so they offered him this part, and he took it. So he learned this speech when he was rather young. And he's kept it in his pocket. He's kept it in his internal memory, not his external memory, for many years. And on more than one occasion, he has had occasion to pull it out. I heard the story of one time during the time of Maggie Thatcher. Remember her? Some of you do, some of you don't. I can tell. Some of you are way too young. But when her foreign minister was Jack Straw, and there were a lot of people coming to England, they were called asylum seekers in those days. You know, they were looking for asylum. Maybe some were Ukrainians, by the way, but a lot of them were brown people, you know, people from India or Pakistan or Africa. Who knows where they were from? They were asylum seekers. And a lot of people had no empathy for asylum seekers. We don't need those people here. Get rid of them. So it just so happened that all the important people were going to be at a fancy dinner. And they said, hey, Ian McKellen, you want to come and be part of this fancy dinner? He said, sure, why not? And they said, you want to give a speech? He said, sure. What are you going to do? He said, oh, I don't know. I'll tell you later. Okay, fine. All right, Ian McKellen, what are you going to do for your speech? He said, oh, I don't know. They said, nope. We know you. We know how you are. You're going to do something political. You have to tell us what you're going to do, or we're not going to invite you to the fancy dinner. He said, okay, fine. I'll do something by Shakespeare. And they said, oh, great. That's fine. That's fine. Okay, Shakespeare, that's not political. That's fine. So he got to the dinner, and Jack Straw was seated right across from him, who said, no asylum seekers, we don't want these foreigners, we don't want these strangers in our land. And Ian McKellen gave them this speech, which we're about to hear. Once again, the speech begins like with Thomas More saying, grant them removed.
In St. Martin in the Fields, and the complaint was about strangers. Strangers in our midst, and the cry was that they should be removed. Usual complaints about strangers, you know, they'd eat odd food, speak odd languages, take our jobs, take our houses, better send them back wherever they came from. And the authorities sent out to put down the riot, at least according to William Shakespeare, Thomas More, the hero of Man for All Seasons, at this time a youngish lawyer who presented the case for peace by arguing that people should obey the law and stop rioting, and secondly being by Shakespeare with a plea to humanity, which has earned its place in this wonderful book. It does say that the speech is attributed to Shakespeare because he didn't write the whole of the play that it appears in. But there is no doubt he wrote it because, well, when you hear it, you'll know. But you can go and see it. It's in the British Museum. It's the only example of Shakespeare's writing of a script in existence, just one page. And it's this speech. It's symbolic and wonderful for all sorts of reasons. That it should be this speech of all, so little known, and so at the heart of Shakespeare's humanity that it should be permanently on display. So the cry is that the strangers should be removed. And Thomas More replies, grant them removed, and grant that this your noise hath chid down all the majesty of England. Imagine that you see the wretched strangers, their babies at their backs, with their poor luggage, plodding to the ports and coasts for transportation, and that you sit as kings in your desires, authority quite silenced by your brawl, and you in rough of your opinions clothed. What have you got? I'll tell you. You had taught how insolence and strong hand should prevail, how order should be quelled, and by this pattern not one of you should live an aged man, for other ruffians, as their fancies wrought, with self-same hand, self-reason, and self-right, would shark on you, and men like ravenous fishes feed on one another. Oh, desperate as you are, wash your foul minds with tears, and those same hands that you like rebels lift against the peace, lift up for peace, and your unreverent knees make them your feet, to kneel, to be forgiven. You'll put down strangers, kill them, cut their throats, possess their houses, and need the majesty of law in lion to slip him like a hound. Say now, the king, as he is clement, if the offender mourn, should so much come too short of your great trespass, as but to banish you. Whither would you go? What country, by the nature of your error, should give you harbour? Go you to France, or Flanders, to any German province, to Spain, or Portugal, nay, anywhere that not adheres to England, why you must needs be strangers. Would you be pleased to find a nation of such barbarous temper that breaking out in hideous violence would not afford you an abode on earth, whet their detested knives against your throats, spurn you like dogs, and like as if that God owned not, nor made not you, nor that the elements were all appropriate to your comfort, but chartered unto them? What would you think to be thus used? This is the stranger's case, and this your mountainish inhumanity.
So, a pretty good speech, and by the way, that's a rather old video. We really know now that it was written by Shakespeare. It's been it's universally accepted that it was by Shakespeare. Go ahead and put the info of put my contact info up rather than that image. The first slide. I think it's the last slide. There we go. Yeah. There's my info. There's my email address, and I'm sorry that didn't make it on the handout. Anyway, not everybody got a handout. So if you want to email me or get in touch with me, find me on Facebook, or you can email me if you have a question. We do have some time for questions, by the way, if you can stay. But this speech, wow. This speech, the last 20 lines there say, what if you went to France or Flanders, to any German province, to Spain or Portugal, anywhere else but here? You would be strangers. One man's countryman is another man's stranger, right? You're not strangers. Are you all Ukrainians living here? Besides Parker. Hey, yeah, I'm at home. I'm in my own people. It's great. Well, we have another stranger here. But the day could come when you yourself are a stranger. If you are outside your home, then you are a stranger. Why, then you must needs be strangers. Would you be pleased to find a nation having a riot against you because you were a stranger? Probably not. Probably not. Spurn you like dogs, right? That's Shakespeare. He's recycling material from Merchant of Venice, right? Right? Don't treat strangers like that. Don't kick them like dogs. Don't riot against them to your comfort, to be used as. And that is the stranger's case, and that is your mountainous inhumanity. And then the next line, which is the next line on there? Faith, he says true. This is all the writers. Let's do as we may be done to. Can you see that on your handout? Okay, let's read that together. Faith, he says true. Come on. Faith, he says true. Let's do as we may be done to. That was Shakespeare's plagiarizing, isn't he? Where did Shakespeare get that? Of another wise man, Jesus of Nazareth. Do unto others, you would have them do it to you. And other religions also have the same idea, by the way, not just Christianity. And so Shakespeare says, listen, if you consider yourself civilized, if you consider yourself a Christian, if you consider yourself a human being, don't hate people because they're different from you. Don't discriminate against a Jew or a black or a Dutch or a French or anyone else. And what does Shakespeare have to do with career development? Well, I hope in your companies, I hope in your workplaces that black people can be hired to do the same work as white people. I hope that Jewish people are welcome as clients, as customers, as workers. I even hope that in your workplaces, women are treated as human beings the same as men. So that's our lessons from Shakespeare today. Thank you very much for your attention. We have 10 minutes, Nadia, do we have 10 minutes for questions? Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting, and I'm quite amazed with everything you told us. And my question concerns your last phrases about blacks and Jews. It's very precisely.
That's because we studied about blacks and Jews today.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. I also, go ahead.
Yeah, see, the first American president, Barack Obama, he was black.
Yeah.
And when he won the elections, it was considered the victory over racism, a triumph of tolerance.